Picture this. It's 1204, and the most powerful fortress in all of Europe is about to fall. Not to an enemy army, not to a rival king, but to something nobody saw coming. The castle that had never been taken, that had stood for over a century as the symbol of Norman power, was about to crumble from the inside. And it all started with one man's hunger for revenge. You're standing on the cliffs of Normandy in the year 1196, watching as thousands of workers swarm like ants across the limestone. King Richard the Lionheart himself is here, personally overseeing every stone that gets laid. This isn't just any castle. This is Château Gaillard, Richard's masterpiece. He's pouring a fortune into it, enough money to fund 3 crusades. The castle rises from the rock like it's part of the cliff itself. 3 separate defensive rings, walls 20 feet thick, and a position so perfect that Richard himself called it his saucy castle, his beautiful daughter that no one could ever touch. From up here, you can see the entire Seine Valley. Nothing moves without Richard knowing about it. For 8 years, Château Gaillard does exactly what Richard built it to do. It guards the road to ruin, it protects Normandy, and it makes the French king wake up every morning knowing there's a fortress he can't crack just sitting there, taunting him. But everything is about to change. Meet Philip Augustus, King of France. He's not the strongest king, he's not the richest, and he definitely doesn't have Richard's reputation as a warrior. But Philip has something Richard doesn't: patience, and a really, really long memory for grudges. Philip has been trying to kick the English out of Normandy for years. Every time he gets close, there's Château Gaillard, sitting on that cliff like a middle finger pointed straight at Paris. Richard built it specifically to mess with Philip, and Philip knows it. The chronicler Rigord wrote that Philip would stare at maps of Normandy for hours, always coming back to that one castle that blocked everything. But here's the thing about patient people. They notice details that hotheads miss. While Richard was off playing Crusader and getting himself killed by a crossbow bolt in 1199, Philip was watching, learning, planning. The new English king, John Lackland, isn't Richard. Not even close. Where Richard was a legend on the battlefield, John is. Well, let's just say there's a reason they called him Lackland. The guy couldn't hold on to a sandwich, let alone an empire. Spring of 1203. Philip doesn't just march an army to Château Gaillard. He brings engineers. Lots of them. This isn't going to be a quick siege where you starve people out. Philip has studied every inch of this castle, and he's found something interesting. See, Richard built Château Gaillard to be perfect from the outside. Those 3 defensive rings? They're designed to stop armies coming up the hill. But Richard made one tiny mistake. He assumed attackers would play by the rules. Philip's engineers start digging. Not over the walls, not around the walls, under them. The pipe rolls from 1204 show that Philip spent over 1,200 pounds just on mining tools and timber supports. That's more than most nobles saw in 5 years. Meanwhile, inside the castle, Roger de Lacy is trying to figure out what that scraping sound is. Roger's a good commander, one of John's best, but he's got 140 men trying to hold a castle built for 500. John promised reinforcements. John promises a lot of things. The scraping gets louder. By August 1203, Philip has done something nobody thought was possible. He's taken the outer bailey of Château Gaillard, not by scaling the walls or battering down the gates, by literally digging underneath the chapel and collapsing an entire section of wall. Roger de Lacy pulls his men back to the middle bailey, but now he's got a new problem. There are hundreds of civilians packed in there with him. Families from the surrounding villages who thought the great castle would protect them. Roger's got to feed them, protect them, and somehow hold out until King John gets off his ass and sends help. John doesn't come. John never comes. Winter hits Normandy like a hammer in 1203. Roger makes the hardest decision of his military career. He opens the gates and pushes the civilians out, not to safety, into no man's land between his walls and Philip's army. The annals of Margam describe what happened next as a sight to make angels weep. 400 people, mostly women and children, trapped in the freezing cold between 2 armies. Philip won't let them through to safety. Roger can't let them back in because he doesn't have food. For months, They survive in caves and makeshift shelters, eating grass and bark, while two kings play their chess game overhead. February 1204. Philip's patience finally pays off. His miners have been working for months underneath the inner keep, the last ring of defense. But here's where it gets crazy. They don't just undermine the walls. They get creative. One of Philip's men notices something. There's a window in the keep, just one window that's a little too low, a little too wide. In any other castle, no big deal. But Château Gaillard is built on a cliff. That window is hanging over empty air, 200 feet up. A French soldier named Peter Bogus volunteers for what's basically a suicide mission. At night, during a snowstorm, he climbs the cliff face, 200 feet straight up, in the dark, with a rope and a prayer. The Chronicle of Normandy says it took him 4 hours to reach that window. Peter gets inside and does something brilliant. He doesn't attack the guards. He opens the main gate from the inside. Suddenly, Philip's entire army is pouring into the courtyard of the unbreakable castle. Roger de Lacy wakes up to find French soldiers in his bedroom. The siege is over. 8 months of hell, ended by one guy with good climbing skills and a lot of nerve. But here's the real kicker. When Philip's men search the castle, they find something that changes everything. Hidden in the keep's foundations are Richard's original building plans. Detailed drawings showing every weakness, every vulnerability. Richard never expected anyone to get close enough to use them. The fall of Château Gaillard breaks something in Normandy that never really gets fixed. Within 6 months, Philip has taken Rouen, Caen, and pretty much every English stronghold north of the Loire River. King John's great Angevin Empire, built by his father Henry II and expanded by Richard gone. But the real tragedy isn't political. It's human. Remember those 400 civilians Roger pushed out into the cold? The Chronica Majora records that fewer than 40 survived the winter. Entire families wiped out because two kings couldn't figure out how to share a continent. Roger de Lacy himself survives the siege but dies in a French prison 2 years later. Philip treats him well, even offers him lands if he'll switch sides, but Roger refuses. Dies loyal to a king who abandoned him. And John? John loses more than just a castle. He loses his reputation, his nobles' respect, and eventually his throne. The English barons who signed the Magna Carta in 1215 specifically mention John's failure to defend the realm as one of their complaints. They're talking about Château Gaillard. Here's the thing about building the perfect fortress. There's no such thing. Richard the Lionheart spent 8 years in a king's ransom creating something he thought was unbreakable. But every strength has a weakness, every plan has a flaw, and every impossible problem has a solution if you're patient enough to find it. Château Gaillard didn't fall because Philip had more men or better weapons. It fell because Richard built it to fight the last war, not the next one. He designed it to stop armies that played by medieval rules. But Philip changed the rules. That's the real lesson here. Power isn't about building the biggest walls or having the strongest army. It's about adapting when the world changes around you. Richard couldn't do that. He was too busy being a legend. John couldn't do that. He was too busy being John. Philip could, and that made all the difference. The ruins of Château Gaillard are still there on that cliff in Normandy, still watching over the Seine Valley after 800 years. But now they're watching over a world Richard never could have imagined. History is full of stories just like this. Perfect plans that failed, impossible sieges that succeeded, and ordinary people who changed everything. If you want more stories like this one, make sure to hit that subscribe button.